All right, so on top of our pocket hole machine right now is sitting our mortise machine. And we're going to be using the mortise machine to cut these holes. Now this machine is going to allow us to cut a square hole by drilling in the middle of this. There's a drill bit, and then there's a square chisel on the outside. So it's creating a square hole, but it's using a drill bit to remove the bulk of the material, and then a chisel to come in and clean up the fine amounts left over. Your board is going to stick underneath this foot here. This is going to help us keep from pulling your workpiece up when the handle comes back up, because you're going to go down and up several times. So we want our board to fit underneath here and kind of have some movement there. Now we want to make sure we're in the center of that mark, and so I have my 3/8 laid out, and now if we just pull the handle down and take a look, we should be able to see if we're in the center mark. And that drill bit that's in the middle should also be an indicator for us and leave a little indication right on that center line we had. We're really close to where we want to be. I don't know that I would mess with that. It's right on that center line. So what we're going to do is line up the end and do the end cut first here. So I'm going to line up my board, and I'm going to start on the end here, and I'm going to just start drilling my holes, and then I'm just going to overlap my pattern slightly so that my bit will come down. So we've got it lined up. We'll turn the machine on. You can plunge out and get the dust cleaned out of there occasionally so it doesn't build up too much. Okay, so we made it through. I'm going to overlap my pattern and drill down and do that again. And I'm going to come do my final cut here so I get the right length. And I'm going to come back a little bit and do that little wedge that's left there, a little bit of material. Now the reason I did that first is because if it tries to cut halfway and slides at an angle, I'm not going to get that last hole cut very well. So I went and did the ends first, and I'm going to come back and do this part now. Okay, now we can turn the machine off. Now the back side's not going to be very good for us today. We didn't support it with a support piece underneath there. Now typically if this was a good project or on your piece, we should have a scrap or a sacrificial piece underneath to help prevent all of this blowout. So I would strongly recommend using a scrap piece of material underneath your good piece so it doesn't blow out the back like that. So now we would take our tenon and slide it in here and make sure we've got a good fit. For this activity, we're going to be using the dado blade on the table saw, and we're going to be using this tenoning jig to cut the tenons. And what this jig does is allows us to hold the workpiece securely straight up and down and make the cut past the blade. Now for this particular activity, we're all making the same joint, and so it's going to be set for you and set up, so you shouldn't really need to mess with any of the knobs or handles over here. You should just have to come up and clamp your piece in. Now I'm on the opposite side as the operator. The operator is going to stand over there, and there's some handles. So let's go over there and take a look. As you're in the operator's position, there's some handles here for you to hold on to so your hands are safely out of the way. There's this tightening and loosening mechanism to hold your board tight to the fences that are here. So for today, or for this activity, we're going to just make sure it's loaded nice and tight against this back lip and then tighten it up. And then we're going to run our piece through. Before we do that, we probably should set our saw blade, and our saw blade thickness should be the same thickness as the material, or 15/16. So we're probably going to need to raise the blade. And if you remember, to raise the blade height, we're going to use the handle right next to the on switch. Right down here, we're going to use that handle to raise the blade up to the appropriate height. All right, so I've got my blade, my piece here, and I'm going to rotate the blade height until I get it the same height as the workpiece. We're going to be doing a through mortise and tenon all the way through, so we should have this nice and flush. I got just a hair. I can barely feel the metal blade, so that's good. We would want the tenon to stick out just a little bit so you can sand it flush when you're done. So that's how we're setting the blade height there. So now that we got the blade height set, now we can load this back into the tendoning jig here and tighten that up. And then once we're secure, we're going to run this through. We'll turn it on and run it through. Remember, your safety glasses need to be on at this point and following all the safety rules and procedures in the shop. So we'll turn it on. So you'll notice we ran it through and then stopped. We didn't bring it back over the moving blade. So you just want to go through, turn the machine off, and then you can get your piece out of there. And again, we don't really want to reach over the moving blade, so we're going to walk around and remove our workpiece from the jig. And we're going to simply just loosen the handle and pull the workpiece out, and then we can slide the jig back past the blade. So we just ran it through with this rabbit looking piece on the outside of the fence here. So now we're going to rotate this around, and now this notch is going to be going against the plate or the fence on here, and then we can get this in here secure. Make sure you're tight against this back piece and the fence over here or the table, and then we're going to tighten it up and lock it in place. All right, we walked around the machine to pull the board out. Don't pull the jig back over the workpiece with the board in there. And now you can see that we have starting to design our tenon on here. Now we need to do our other shoulder cuts right here to make the little cosmetic shoulder there, so it kind of hides our imperfections that we may have. And so for this, we're going to use the dado blade, and we're going to raise the blade to the height of our line that we made there. Okay, and so we're going to use that line, that 1/4 inch in, as our depth that we need. So we're going to move the jig off the table, and we're actually going to get the miter gauge out now. So we've got the miter gauge for the saw. We want to make sure it truly is at 0. The best way to do that is to put it upside down in the miter track and put the base of the miter gauge there against the fence to verify that it is 90 degrees to the track. So that's the best way to check a miter gauge, to see if it's at 90 degrees. And then we're going to take our piece and we're going to stand it up on edge like this, and we're going to set the blade height. So I'm going to use those pencil marks I made at 1/4 inch, and I'm going to line that up right on the edge of the top of that saw tooth. Okay, and then from there we should be good. And now we're going to set the miter gauge for our use. So we have this pre-cut shoulder here that we can use as our depth. So if I put that up against the table saw, or up against the saw blade here, and have the teeth right against there, I should be able to bring the fence over and have that be the size that I want to set. That way I can run my pass through the miter gauge, or through the table saw, and then I can move it back and cut a little bit more, because there's going to be a little extra. Okay, if we look here, our cut is going to be wider than the width of the blade. So we're going to have to do 2 passes on each side. But this will help us keep a nice uniform distance on there. So we'll turn the saw on. We look here, it's pretty flush for us on this side of the joint. It's a different color. The blade is burnt a little bit on that side, but right here we are very flush on the surface. So for that one, I would call that pretty good. On this side, there's a little indent, just about a 32nd of an inch. And I think what happened is when we did the shoulder cut, it maybe was not sitting quite flat against the fence, and that's where we're getting that lip. So we're gonna flip it over now and do the other side. So right here is looking very nice. Again, it's discolored because the saw blade burnt it when it was standing up, but it feels really flush. So that's what we would do for creating our tenon. Now our tenon needs to fit in the mortise, so we need to check this against the mortise once we create both of them. This might need some tweaking once that mortise hole is cut. When you have your mortise and tenon done, we should be able to slide them together and have a pretty tight fit. We don't want there to be a lot of slop, but there should be a little extra slop or a little bit of movement, just a little tiny bit, so that when you put this together, the glue, there's room for glue inside the joint. If this is so tight that you have to hammer it together, it's gonna push all of the glue out of the joint, and that wouldn't be good. So that's how we would go about laying out our mortise and tenon joint. Again, you're going to back or put a backer behind the mortise so it doesn't blow out. And when we put this together, we typically want the tongue to stick out the mortise on a through one just slightly so that we can sand it and make it nice and flush when we're done. Now, good luck on your mortise and tenon joint.